The first controlled, self-sustained nuclear chain reaction was a turning point in science. Some of the scientists involved went on to be some of the first and most influential activists in nuclear safety and civilian control. This is their story. Enrico Fermi was born in Italy on September 29, 1901, to Alberto and Ida Gladys Fermi. In July 1918, Fermi graduated and moved to University of Pisa, where he studied physics. In 1925, when Mussolini took over Italy, Fermi was teaching at the University of Rome. In Rome was where he met his wife Laura in 1938. Fermi was awarded the Nobel Prize for Physics. The news of winning the prize was especially gratifying to him because it gave him the opportunity to leave Italy and accept the prize in Sweden. Ever since Mussolini took over Italy, he had been restricting people's rights and following the lead of Germany in restricting the rights of Jewish people especially. Fermi and his wife, who was Jewish, knew that they would need an excuse to leave the country and immigrate. So they went to Sweden to accept the prize, then immigrated from Sweden directly to the United States. Fermi arrived in New York in January 1939 and began teaching at Columbia University, where he first got the offer to work on the first nuclear chain reaction. The first controlled, self-sustained nuclear chain reaction happened on December 2, 1942. The experiment was conducted in secret in a squash pit under the West Stand at the University of Chicago. Henry Moore's nuclear energy sculpture now stands in this spot. The experiment was hastened because the United States had been at war with Germany and Japan for a year, and the pressure to be able to create a nuclear bomb was high. This was especially urgent because the United States feared that Germany would also be working on mastering the technology in order to create the bomb. It began at Columbia University, where Enrico Fermi was teaching. He was leading the project in secret. However, he learned that his workspace at Columbia was not large enough to fit the reactor. Also, Arthur H. Compton had recently started working at the University of Chicago's metallurgical lab. So Fermi moved to the project at the University of Chicago. There was a great rush to create the nuclear reaction because of worries that Germany would have made this discovery first and create the bomb. At the University of Chicago, they began constructing a pile of graphite with uranium rods to set off the reaction. This would be known as Chicago Pile 1, or CP1. During this time, the scientists would meet under a tree at the main quad, where they did not have to worry about spies listening to their conversation. On December 2nd, 1942, testing started at 8:30 a.m. They continued until Fermi called a lunch break, then met again at 2 p.m. At 3:25 p.m., the final rod was taken out.
Even though the first controlled self-sustaining nuclear chain reaction was barely strong enough to power a light bulb, it was a technological and scientific turning point because power had never been generated this way before. They were concerned about meeting the considerable intellectual and technological challenge. It was a very difficult feat that they were attempting. It required thousands of scientists all over the country and thousands more support personnel to make this happen.
The experiment was successful, and because of the potential for destruction, the world would never be the same. After the first controlled, self-sustained nuclear chain reaction was a success, the government took over the project with the sole intention of constructing a bomb. The general in charge of the project was General Groves, a rough man and who was known to be a bully. He made J. Robert Oppenheimer in charge of the scientists on the project and moved it to a boarding school for boys in Los Alamos, New Mexico. The project began in 1943 when much of the world had been at war for many brutal years. The United States was at war with Germany and Italy in Europe and with Japan in the Pacific. By early 1945, Germany had surrendered, but the U.S. was still at war with Japan. 2 years later, the United States bombed Hiroshima, Japan, killing tens of thousands of people on impact. 3 days later, the U.S. bombed Nagasaki, Japan, killing 40,000 people on impact. The next day, Japan surrendered, ending the war. In all, the two bombs killed 340,000 people from impact and radiation poisoning. They were the most destructive weapons ever to be used. Even before the bombings, after the first controlled, self-sustained nuclear chain reaction was achieved, many scientists were worried about the implications of such a dangerous weapon, that the public was not informed about the bomb, and that only the United States were in control of such a powerful weapon.
Many of the scientists who were working on the atomic bomb during World War II were European Jewish refugees, and their primary concern initially was stopping Hitler and stopping Nazi Germany. And so after Germany surrendered, in I believe it was April of 1945, they were not so keen on seeing the bomb used against Japan.
This group formed the Atomic Scientists of Chicago, a group started in September of 1945, led by Johnson. In December 1945, they published the first copy of the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, a magazine devoted to informing the public that is still being published today. The Bulletin is one of the most influential and informative publications on the dangers of nuclear weapons and energy ever made. Another of the long-standing symbols of both the Atomic Scientists of Chicago and the dangers of nuclear energy is the Doomsday Clock. In 1947, the Bulletin's cover started showing the Doomsday Clock, a representation of how close we are to midnight, which is total annihilation. At the most recent update in 2012, we are 5 minutes to midnight. The closest we have ever been to midnight is 3 minutes to midnight in 1984 at the height of the Cold War. The Doomsday Clock is a symbol of how easily mankind could destroy itself. In the present, the Doomsday Clock also covers the dangers of biosecurity and climate change as parts of its representation.
The Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists and the Doomsday Clock are important today, even many years after they were created, because they are a continual reminder to us all that we humans pose incredible dangers to our own survival. The Doomsday Clock is a brilliant way of educating the public about the dangers of nuclear war. It's brilliant because it instantly and visually communicates a lot of information through one simple symbol.
The Atomic Scientists of Chicago started by writing the Jeffries Report, submitted November 18, 1944, which was an official report giving detailed accounts of the different concerns involving nuclear research. The report recommended the United States warn its allies that they possessed the nuclear bomb. It also urged international controls and for the civilians to be informed. They also were involved with a committee, the Frank Committee, led by James Frank, a Jewish-German refugee who did not want government control over scientific research because of what it had done in Germany. He was the chairman of the committee on social and political implications. This group wanted the bomb dropped on an uninhabited area to show the Japanese its power instead of killing civilians. In 1946, the McMahon Act was passed with the help of the lobbying of the scientists of Chicago. The McMahon Act helped confirm civilian controls of nuclear weapons and establish the Civilian Atomic Energy Commission. The reaction was not only a turning point in science, but because of the potential for destruction, nuclear energy needed to be carefully controlled. This made another turning point, one in the activism of scientists. The Atomic Scientists of Chicago led in showing how to manage this new power, to teach the public, and pursue international and civilian controls. Their work has been the best and first activism in nuclear science. Without these controls, we might have already reached midnight on the Doomsday Clock.